In this video, we'll discuss fractions and percentages. These are mathematical terms that are closely connected to each other and used to express different mathematical information. So for example, we can compare data. And as an example, you can think of a university, and you can often find information about the percentage of students going into engineering versus the percentage of students going into media careers. By viewing this information, one can conclude what kind of network and career prospects a certain university might offer. In some cases, we tend to use one over the other. For example, we can use percentages to express change as growth or decline. We can also use percentage as a discount, while fractions might also deliver the same information. In common speech, discounts are expressed as percentages, and we can think of shopping, how we can get a 30% discount or a 50% discount. We use fractions and percentages to express composition. For example, we may want to look at the cost and separate it into parts. For example, what part of the cost is electricity or energy, what part of it is inputs, and which part comes from advertising expense. We also in everyday life use percentage in banking when we hear terms such as interest rate. And even in sports, you are very familiar probably with such terms as a shooting percentage. Our two terms, fraction and percentage, express the idea of a portion, of a certain share. A proportion is another term used. And all of this, in simplest term, expresses what part of a whole does a certain piece represent. Let's look at the example of pizza. When we buy pizza, a lot of times it's cut into either 6 or 8 slices. If we eat 2 of 8 slices, we can express it as a fraction, 2 out of 8, or in percentage term as 25%. What does this mean? This means that out of the whole, which consists of 8 pieces, we consumed 25% of it, or 2/8. As in another example, let's look at a certain school where 800 students take a college admissions test. 200 of those students take ACT. And the question may be, what percentage of what portion of total student body takes ACT? So that we can express using either fractions, and setting it up is in the denominator, we're going to put the total number, which is 800 students at school who took the test. And in the numerator, we'll place 200, those that took the ACT test. And we can also express this in percentage terms as 25% of students who took a test took the ACT. Before we get to why 25% is the same as 2 out of 8 in pizza example, or 200 out of 800 in the ACT test takers example, let's look at the concept of percentage as part of 1. 25%. Let's look at this number. We are sometimes explain the concept of percentage as it's 25 out of 100. So what does that really mean? It's kind of tricky if we think of the pizza example, because that means that we've eaten 25 out of 100 slices that we bought. We didn't buy 100 slices, and we definitely did not eat 25 of them. So that's a little confusing in this case. However, if we look at the second case of ACT test takers, it makes more sense. It says that 25 out of every 100 students who took the test took the ACT. And we can see that if 25 out of 100 took it, then we do some math and it kind of makes sense that 200 out of 800 did it. Let's move on and take the words out. Let's write it down as 25 over 100. It is exactly the same as 25 out of 100. And this is a fraction form of 25%. Now let's take the next step and using a calculator, divide the numerator by the denominator. What we get in the end is the output of 0.25. Let's whip up a summary. So we looked at 25%. We expressed it verbally as 25 out of 100. Then we expressed it in the fraction form as 25 divided by 100. And ultimately, we got to the decimal form of 0.25. If you're not very comfortable with fractions and percentages, I would encourage you to stay here until you completely understand the logic and the steps of going from 25% to verbal expression to fraction expression, and finally to the decimal expression. As we move on, let's now gray out the verbal and the fraction part. And what we get as a result is that 25% is the same as 0.25. In order for you to get proficient in going from the percentage terms to the decimal expression, you need to understand as the starting point that 100% is the same as the number 1 with 2 decimal points after it. Accordingly, any number that is less than 100% would have 0 as a whole number and would fill up the 2 decimal points depending on what percentage we're dealing with. 25% we would write down as 0.25, since we discussed that the percentage, the two numbers, take the 2 spots after the decimal point. 95% comes out as 0.95. 5% is a bit tricky, and we write it as 0.05, not 0.5. 0.5 stands for 50%, because we can understand that if we're filling out 2 spots, then we need to add a 0 after 5, because as we know, we normally don't write zeros at the end of a decimal number. All percentages below 100 would end up having a decimal form of under 1, and those that are above would be more than 1 in the decimal expression. So for example, 150% could be expressed as 1.5 or 1.50, but since we don't write zeros at the end of the decimals, we would more commonly express it as 1.5.